By migrant, I mean an individual who is not necessarily born in the country where they reside, could be there legally, could be there not so, or as we say euphemistically in the U.S. as an undocumented alien, could be there as a resident, and in fact in this study it matters that they're a resident, and by that I mean the migrant has been there for at least a year. So what does that mean? What does that exclude? That excludes all the migrants who are transient, often transient laborers, seasonal laborers, or individuals who are expats who come but don't stay for at least a year. That's important because their remittances, the money they send home, is categorized differently from residents. So if you have $1 of remittances coming from a group, say Jamaicans from the UK back to Jamaica, if the remitter has been legally, illegally, or otherwise in the UK for a year or more, it's considered workers' remittances. It's probably about 70 cents of that dollar going back to Jamaica. If that same individual is a transient, has been there for less than a year, then the remittance is subcategorized as something called compensation of employees. Lots of money doesn't necessarily mean lots of venture investment, but it means we should care about what the composition of those uses are, and one of the claims I'm going to make for you is that a non-trivial amount, that is an amount that's well above zero, and is one of the principal components, if you will, of remittances, is going to either explicitly investments in new businesses or existing businesses, or it's going to indirect commercial activities, usually in the form of real estate investments or household improvements, where the household is also the source of the business. I'm running a business in sub-Saharan Africa for hair care products, and it's out of my back door. If I invest in real estate to fix that place up, that's a business as well as a personal investment. When you put those together, the numbers, the percentages are substantial, running from as low as perhaps 4 or 5% of every dollar remitted to as high as 20, perhaps even 25%. So the numbers are substantial. The numbers are very substantially about activities that we associate with commercial and more specifically about entrepreneurial activities, and therefore they merit our attention. Because even if individually these are small amounts, collectively they're a torrent. We also know that remittances have an important impact on economic growth. Now, we know that now. There have been studies in the last decade which have asked whether remittances encourage growth or if remittances in certain circumstances may retard it. That is, sending money home to individuals may keep them from entering the labor market, and if they're quite skilled, perhaps it will stifle new business creation because entrepreneurs don't want to start businesses if they can't find good workers. We've largely put that to rest. We know that the net impact of remittances on economic development more generally is positive and we believe substantial, particularly in less developed countries. The reason I believe that migrants remitting money may be using that money for a non-trivial, substantial part to fund and found new businesses is in part they have some relative advantages in some of the least developed countries compared to these institutions. And it goes to the point I made earlier about how these institutional investors tend not to locate operations in countries with poor contract, property rights, all the formal arrangements, the kind of formal business rules of the game, especially for financial investors, that we assume are in places like France and the UK and the US. Instead, these migrants can rely on alternative, informal safeguards that are tied, that I'll use, generally tied to 2 C's, to clan, the extended family, and to community. So I can send money home and I can put it through a formal organization with all the contracts and all the assurances that would come with having, say, well-established legal institutions. And that may work well if I'm sending that money back to the U.S. But if I'm sending that money to a sub-Saharan African country, where even if those formalities are observed, they're very difficult to enforce in the breach, then I need alternative assurances. And here I draw on recent research that discusses, indeed, is the theme of the upcoming Academy of Management meetings this August in Boston on the informal economy and how family or an extended family can act as an additional safeguard or an alternative safeguard. Research that we know, for instance, about extended clans and families among ethnic Chinese around the world that are not facilitate large financial transactions, even technology transactions, without necessarily the formal institutions of contract and property rights there. I've got blood, I've got relationships, or community relationships. These migrants who send money home aren't necessarily sending it to the whole home country. If that home country is Mozambique or Rwanda or Togo, they're sending it back in almost every case to a very specific community within there, which is where they often come from or where their family is from. So clan and community become two informal alternative safeguards to the formal institutions that we assume are in place for large financial transactions to start new businesses. And make no mistake, for these individuals, these are large transactions. One research pattern that I've seen again and again and again throughout my work on remittances is that whether they're in concentrated enclaves or dispersed, whether they're from one kind of part of the world or another, less skilled, at least as proxied for by education, those migrants tend to be the ones for which the investment dollar is most important for purposes of new business startups, of new business foundings. And I think that's non-intuitive. And I think it has a lot to do with a deeper understanding of what the alternatives are for commercial activity when a dollar comes home to a less developed country. That is, there aren't other types of share markets to invest in or existing capital to invest in. You really have to use this either for strict consumption or for starting your own business. I mean, there's really no choice. Everyone has to be an entrepreneur if they're going to be in the commercial market, whether it's formal or informally defined.